Welcome to the Past Unveiled, a place where the past moves very slowly, where kings wrote letters that took months to arrive, and farmers counted the seasons, one gentle sunrise at a time. Tonight we'll wander through the calm corridors of history, no wars, no drama, just the quiet turning of time. So take a deep breath, let your thoughts drift like leaves on a still pond. And if you find peace in these sleepy stories, you can like, comment, and subscribe, not out of urgency, but simply whenever you wake up. For now, close your eyes and let history whisper you to sleep. Welcome to Beautifully Boring History. Now let's begin with Story 1 title. The Tanners of Toulouse, the Smell of Industry. You wouldn't notice the tanners first, not unless the wind was in the wrong direction. But if you had walked through the southern quarters of Toulouse in the year 1274, your senses would eventually guide you to them. They were never far from the river. This was by necessity, not preference. Water was essential for their work, for the soaking, washing, and rinsing of hides. The Garonne River, flowing sluggishly through the city, offered what the tanners needed most, a place to dump waste that no one else wanted to see or smell again. The world of the tanner. In a time when most trades clung to ancient rhythms of season and sun, tanning was an oddly scientific business. It required exactitude, in temperature, in time, in ratios of lime to water and bark to hide. Unlike the grain merchants or the bakers, whose work was visible in loaves and sacks, the tanner worked with raw, decaying flesh, transforming it into something useful: leather for shoes, belts, sheaths, saddles, and book covers. But the price was steep. Tanners were often relegated to the lowest rung of social life. The odors, the filth, and the stigma of handling the flesh of dead animals cast them outside polite society. In Toulouse, the city's statutes from the mid-13th century made it clear: tanners were to operate downwind, beyond the wealthier homes and near the public refuse zones. Some cities even required them to tan outside the walls altogether. A day's work by the vat. A tanner's day began before light. His first task was to prepare the hides, which usually arrived from local butchers, flayed from oxen or sheep not more than a day before. These skins were coated in blood, bits of flesh, and hair. To the untrained eye, they looked like refuse. To the tanner, they were raw opportunity. The hides were first washed, then submerged in pits of lime water, often mixed with ashes or stale urine. This concoction softened the hair, which was scraped away after several days. Then came the fleshing knife, a curved blade used to remove fat and remaining tissue. This labor, often done while bent over a beam, wore on the back and hands, leaving many tanners permanently stooped by age 40. Only after the hide was stripped clean could it be soaked in tannins. These were gathered from oak bark, sumac, or chestnut trees, materials crushed into chips and steeped to leach out the needed acids. The hides were left to soak in pits for weeks, sometimes months, gradually darkening and toughening into leather. Children and apprentices. Children in tanner households did not escape the trade. From the age of 6 or 7, boys would carry water, stir the lime vats, or collect urine from nearby homes, sometimes offered freely, sometimes bought for a few coins. Apprentices would be beaten into discipline and taught by repetition. The guilds, where they existed, ensured that training took 7 years or more, with little formal recognition until the final test of a masterwork, perhaps a pair of gloves or a cured saddle strap. Girls, though usually kept from the vats, worked at the periphery of the trade, salting hides, sewing soft leather into pouches, or tending the boiling pots used in rendering fat from the scraped flesh. The smells clung to them as tightly as to their brothers. The guild and the stigma. By the 13th century, most major cities in Europe had craft guilds, and Toulouse was no different. The Tanners' Guild, La Confrérie des Tanneurs, had bylaws governing the purchase of hides, the size of vats, and even the hours during which waste could be dumped into the river. These guilds served both economic and legal functions. They regulated quality, protected prices, and, in theory, defended their members from exploitation. Still, even within their own city, tanners were suspect. Their trade was essential but foul. Clergy sometimes refused them burial in sacred ground. Marrying into a tanner's family was rare for those of higher stations. In a time when the odor of sanctity was real and imagined, the stench of industry clung too close to sin. Waste in water. The waste of the tannery was legendary. Hair, flesh, lime, urine, and decomposing organic matter all flowed into the gutters and streams feeding the Garonne. Fish died. The water darkened. Complaints were frequent, though not always heeded. A 1272 petition from Toulouse's fishmongers described their stock as diseased from the river's bile, likely a reference to tannery runoff. And yet the city did not close the tanneries. Leather was needed. For scrolls, for boots, for horse tack, for armor. The armies of France would not ride far without the work of men the town barely tolerated. Of tools and trade. Tanners were skilled in their craft. They wielded knives with precision, handled hides weighing more than their own bodies, and understood the chemical dance between lime and leather. Their work may have been filthy, but it was not mindless. Some grew modestly wealthy. They sold to armorers, booksellers, and cobblers. A few even expanded into couriers, refining the leather further and selling it to tailors. But even those who prospered rarely escaped the smell. The legacy of their profession marked them visibly in the streets. One tanner, Jehan Dalby, left behind a ledger in 1291, recording the sale of 36 hides for parchment, of medium cure, suitable for the monastic scriptorium. These hides would become manuscripts, perhaps even sermons condemning the pride of men like Jehan. As you follow the tanners of Toulouse, steeped in lime and sweat, you might wonder what kept them at the trade, generation after generation, despite the isolation and odor. In the late 13th century, Toulouse was a city caught between tradition and transformation. The legacy of Roman roads still shaped its layout, while new stone churches rose slowly across the skyline. The population hovered around 30,000 souls, including peasants, tradesmen, clerics, and a small but influential merchant class. It was a city of contrasts of incense and dung, Latin hymns and street cries, the clean pages of illuminated books and the grime beneath a tanner's fingernails. As the city grew in wealth and importance, its urban fabric shifted. New orders of friars arrived. Scholars gathered around the schools. Merchants from Italy, Flanders, and Castile arrived with bales of cloth and silver coins. But none of this changed the essential need for leather, nor the place of the tanners within the social hierarchy. They were permitted but barely, essential yet peripheral. They existed in a liminal space, not quite outcasts, not quite citizens. Tanners and the living city. Though the city tried to regulate the filth, it could not eliminate it. The ordinances of 1279, preserved in a faded parchment scroll in the municipal archive, dictated that no tannery was to operate within 100 paces of a church or public square. Tanners were fined for exceeding waste quotas, for failing to cover their pits, for dumping too early in the day. Yet these rules were as often broken as observed. The tanners lived among the vats, and the vats became part of their lives. The tannery district, often called La Peau, or the skin by locals, had its own rhythms, distinct from the rest of the city. Children played with sticks near piles of bark. Dogs prowled for scraps of offal. Laundry lines sagged with stiff aprons caked in lime. Tanners often married within their trade, as others were wary of the association. Their sons became apprentices. Their daughters often married couriers or cobblers. The community, while small, was tightly interwoven. Social life revolved around shared labor, mutual debts, and guild obligations. Sacred and profane, religion and reputation. In medieval life, religion was not merely personal, it was geographical and temporal. The bells of the city's many churches dictated the rhythm of the day. Saints' days, fasts, and processions shaped not only the calendar but the economy. Yet for tanners, Religious integration was limited. The handling of dead animals, the frequent contact with blood, and the perpetual uncleanness meant they were seen by many clerics as ritually impure. Some bishops banned tanners from serving as godparents. Others refused them burial in consecrated ground. Even among those who practiced devotion, sincerely lighting candles, confessing sins, observing feast days, there was a lingering sense of exclusion. A tanner's hands were always marked. No amount of holy water could wash away the stink of the pit. Still, many tanners were pious, even if unwelcome. They built their own altars in back alleys, made donations to small chapels, and commissioned prayers for their dead. In 1288, records show that a tanner named Gilham du Kers paid for the repair of a chapel roof in St. Cyprian. His name, however, was scratched from the memorial stone 2 decades later, likely by a more prestigious donor who took offense at being listed beside a tradesman of such low regard. The economics of hide and leather. The tanning trade was shaped by supply chains that stretched across the countryside. Hides came from local butchers or directly from estates, usually salted and rolled. The price of hides fluctuated wildly depending on war, famine, and disease. A cattle plague in 1267 had nearly destroyed the trade for over a year, leaving hides scarce and prices high. Tanners paid taxes on incoming hides, and again when selling the leather. They negotiated with bark merchants, haggled with cobblers, and sometimes dealt directly with scribes and scholars seeking fine parchment. In some cases, hides were imported from Navarre or Aragon, adding further complexity to the trade. The guild attempted to stabilize prices, but unregulated tanners, known as bastards of the pit, undercut their peers. These rogue tanners often worked outside city walls, evading both dues and oversight. Fights broke out. Guild members petitioned the city for enforcement. And yet demand endured. As the textile industry grew, so did the need for leather belts, straps, and fastenings. As the university expanded, parchment orders increased. Leather was woven into the bones of the city. Leather and literacy. One of the quiet ironies of the tanner's life was his indirect connection to knowledge. The same hides they scraped and soaked became the pages of monastic manuscripts and legal codes. Cowhide made for strong parchment, suitable for charters and canon law. Goat hide, when well cured, was supple enough for prayer books and song scrolls. Tanners themselves were rarely literate. Many could not sign their names and used simple marks or fingerprints instead. And yet, their work literally formed the medium through which literacy flowed. A single manuscript Bible could require the skins of over 200 sheep. Without the tanner, there was no parchment. Without parchment, no preservation. This link between filth and scripture was uncomfortable for the church, but it was also unavoidable. Quietly, monks made deals with tanners. Payments were made in coin, or in kind, sometimes even offering indulgences in exchange for a batch of well-cured skins. Conflict with the city. As the 13th century wore on, urban tensions grew. Merchants sought cleaner streets to attract foreign buyers. Wealthier citizens demanded more regulations on the trades they deemed offensive. The city council, dominated by wool dealers and wine exporters, passed new sanitation edicts in 1293. Among these was a ban on open lime pits. All vats were to be covered or moved to the far side of the river. Waste was to be hauled away, not dumped. Violators faced confiscation of tools or loss of license. The tanners protested. A delegation of 8 guild members presented their case to the council, arguing that the new rules were unworkable and discriminatory. They claimed they were being punished for the city's success. Leather was in demand. They argued, how could the city prosper without it? The council compromised on paper. They agreed to subsidize the building of a new covered tanning yard, but construction never began. Funds were diverted to cathedral repairs instead. The smell that stuck. No matter how skilled or wealthy a tanner became, he carried with him an invisible marker: odor. It soaked into his home, his hair, his clothes. It could not be washed away. Contemporary chroniclers write of the reek of the pit, the crawling stink of flesh, the stench of boiling glue. Some called tanners less puissant udels the useful stinkers, others were less kind. This smell, though offensive, also became a badge of the trade. Within their community, it marked one as industrious, skilled, enduring. It became part of their identity, unwanted by others, but not entirely unwelcome to themselves. One journeyman tanner named Burnet de Foix, in a letter dated 1302, wrote, "We are marked by our vats, but so are the pages of their books. If we stink, so do their laws." The deeper you go into the world of the tanners, the more you begin to see the quiet contradiction they lived with. Necessary yet reviled, skilled yet shunned, connected to knowledge yet barred from its halls. And so we ask, what happens to a trade that becomes too essential to ignore, yet too unpleasant to embrace? The turning of the century. As the 14th century approached, the city of Toulouse hummed with a quiet confidence. Trade routes remained steady, monastic life thrived, and the university expanded. Yet beneath the ecclesiastical stone and merchant wealth, the city's bones remained humble and leathery. The tanning district still clung to the edge of the Garonne, its vats sunk deep into the mud, and its people locked in generations of the same punishing rhythm. Tanning remained one of the few crafts where father taught son by repetition, not theory, a trade learned not in books but in the calluses on one's hands. Even as civic pride blossomed and academic life flourished, the tanners endured in their place. The smells were still unwelcome. The waste still poured into the river. The work was still backbreaking. But in time, the world began to notice not the people, perhaps, but what they made. The rise of Toulouse parchment. By the mid-1300s, Toulouse had become regionally known for a distinct product, fine-quality parchment. Though vellum from northern France and England was prized in ecclesiastical circles, the parchment made from southern hides, particularly those processed along the Garonne, was favored for secular manuscripts, civic registers, and legal scrolls. The reason? Southern tanning processes, often shorter and more acidic, produced parchment that was slightly more pliable and faintly tinted, making it easier to write upon with the newer iron gall inks coming into fashion. While monastic scribes still preferred the pale cream of calfskin vellum, urban clerks appreciated the cheaper and more functional Toulouse parchment. Thus, the tanners, though still social pariahs, began to produce materials that entered the bureaucratic veins of France itself. Decrees, tax ledgers, guild charters, even early treatises on philosophy were written on leather born from their vats. And although their names were rarely credited, their craft left a trace in nearly every corner of civic life. Living and dying in leather. As the years passed, many tanners slowly improved their conditions not by breaking free from the trade, but by doubling down on it. A few families established dynasties, marrying within the guild, investing in more durable vat construction, or building multi-story homes beside their pits. Records from the Guild of Tanners, updated in 1311, show an increasing number of apprentices from outside families, indicating that the trade, while still stigmatized, was becoming a viable economic path for poorer citizens. Those without land or connections could, through patience and endurance, learn a skill that guaranteed lifelong employment, however grim. Some former tanners even entered civic life, a rarity in earlier decades. One Pierre Lartin, born to a tannery master in 1282, eventually served as a guild representative on the town council. While never fully accepted by the upper merchant class, his presence marked a slow erosion of social walls. Yet few tanners retired comfortably. Most worked until their bodies failed, stooped, half-blind from lime fumes, hands gnarled and joints stiff. The average tanner's life expectancy, according to parish records, was notably lower than that of a weaver or carpenter. Many died in their 40s or early 50s. And yet they kept working. Why? Resilience, routine, and resignation. Perhaps because the tanner's life offered something few other occupations did: consistency. In a world racked by unpredictable harvests, rising taxes, and religious upheaval, the tanner's work, however filthy, was dependable. Animals would always be slaughtered. Leather would always be needed. War and famine disrupted many trades, but the tanning vats never stayed dry for long. There was a strange resilience in repetition. The daily rituals of scraping, soaking, and pressing provided structure. For some, even identity. Oral histories passed down in tannery families speak of the bark man, the pit mother, and the glue boy. Nicknames turned titles, occupations turned familial roles. Children growing up among the hides didn't recoil. They played hide-and-seek around stacks of drying leather. They helped carry bark bundles. They learned early to respect the tools, the order, and the rhythm. To them, the stench wasn't a curse, it was home. The Black Death in the tannery. When the plague came in 1348, it did not spare the tanners. Their quarters, clustered near the river and downstream from most fresh water sources, were especially vulnerable. Contaminated runoff, coupled with cramped living conditions, created a perfect breeding ground for pestilence. Entire tanner families were wiped out. Guild records from 1349 show more than 60% attrition among master tanners and apprentices. Some pits were abandoned. Others were commandeered by desperate neighbors hoping to inherit tools or space. And yet in the aftermath, the craft endured. Survivors passed their skills to the next generation. Bark collectors returned to the forests. The river, briefly cleaner for lack of waste, grew foul again. The city rebuilt, and with it, so did the trade. Tanning was, in a way, a metaphor for the times. Rot transformed into utility, decay made purposeful, death turned into something lasting. Cultural footprint, tailies, and taboos. Despite their usefulness, tanners remained figures of contradiction in the medieval imagination. They appear in songs, jokes, and parables, often the butt of ridicule, but sometimes portrayed with gritty wisdom. In one Occitan fable from the late 1300s, a tanner outwits a corrupt judge by offering him a bribe in the form of scented gloves he knows will carry the stench of the pit into the judge's court. When the judge protests, the tanner reminds him, "Even gold smells of blood." The message is clear: corruption stinks worse than tanning. In another tale, a wandering friar is forced to spend the night in a tanner's home. He complains loudly, but the tanner replies, "The Lord made flesh, and I give it purpose. What do you do but speak of it?" The friar is silenced. These stories, passed from mouth to mouth, suggest that while tanners were mocked, they were also acknowledged for their enduring role in the cycle of life, death, and purpose. The long reach of leather. The leather made in Toulouse and cities like it didn't stay local. It traveled sometimes as saddle straps on knights, sometimes as book covers sent to universities in Paris or Avignon. Some hides became scrolls of land ownership, others shoe soles that marched across Europe. A few hides even found their way into the early record books of royal clerks, preserved in palaces and castles. It is possible that documents you can still see today, faded, curling at the edges, originated in the pits of La Pau, among the tanners of Toulouse. This is their quiet legacy. They did not build cathedrals or write treatises, but they provided the physical medium upon which others built and wrote. They were foundational, even if few noticed. Lessons in flesh and bark. So what can we learn from these lives, spent elbow-deep in filth? Perhaps that dignity is not found in cleanliness, but in endurance. That value does not come only from being seen or celebrated, but from making something necessary, again and again, even when no one thanks you. The tanners of Toulouse remind us that civilization is built as much on waste as on wonder, that history is not only the domain of saints and scholars, but of those who quietly made their tools, their pages, and their boots. And now, as we step away from the stink of the pit and the scrape of hide on beam, we are left with one lingering thought. What other essential hands have been forgotten by the pages they helped create? Story 2. A Plowman's Year Farming the Manor in 13th Century England. You wake before the sun, not because you want to, but because you must. The air is thick with cold, dew clings to your woolen tunic, and the only warmth is from the animal breath in the thatched byre you share with your family. The year is 1275, and you are a ploughman. You live on the manor of Sir Ethelred of Bridgenorth, a minor lord whose lands sprawl across a damp corner of Shropshire, somewhere between river and wood. Your village is called Wistow, one of hundreds like it in the rolling countryside of England's feudal tapestry. You do not own your land. You are a villein, a peasant bound to the soil, tethered by customary dues and shaped by the plough. The manor system, ties of soil and service. The structure of your world is manorial. The manor is not just your village, it is your life. It includes your family's croft cottage, a small yardland or verget of about 30 acres, strips of farmland scattered across the open fields, and access to common grazing, woodland, and perhaps a bit of marsh for reeds or peat. In return for these lands, you owe the Lord labor, 2 or 3 days a week, more during harvest time, and always on demand for plowing, carting, fencing, or gathering hay. This is not slavery, but it is not freedom either. You cannot leave without permission, nor can you sell your land. But the manor court protects you, arbitrates disputes, and records the births, deaths, and inheritances of your line. A year begins in winter. The calendar doesn't start in January for you, it begins with Candlemas, around February 2nd, when the cold still bites but the days begin to stretch. The plow must be ready. You and your neighbors form a plow team, sharing a heavy moldboard plow, drawn by 8 oxen yoked in pairs. The beasts are slow but steady, able to cut deep furrows through the sticky, clay-rich English soil. It takes 5 or 6 men to guide the team, one to handle the plow, another to goad the oxen, and others to keep the lines true and clear the debris. The earth is turned, and the fallow field begins its long awakening. Winter is also when the manor court sits and you must attend. You pay your dues, perhaps a few hens, some eggs, and a day's work stacking firewood. The reeve, an appointed peasant overseer, reads out the fines from last season. Someone let their pig root in the Lord's orchard. Another drew too much water from the Lord's fish pond. All is noted, all is fined. Spring, sowing and lambing. By March, your fingers crack from the cold and work, but the fields are greening. You sow barley, oats, and peas, using a broadcast method, scattering seed by hand from a bag slung across your shoulder. It is imprecise but quick. Your wife follows behind with a rake, and your eldest boy scares off the crows. In the meadows, lambs are born. You are not a shepherd, but like most plowmen, you have a few sheep of your own, allowed to graze on the common pasture. They provide milk, wool, and eventually meat, though slaughtering one is rare unless a feast or desperation demands it. Your house is drafty but stable. It is a 2-room wattle and daub hut with a central hearth and no chimney. Smoke curls upward and out through the thatch. The floor is packed earth. You sleep on a straw mattress with your wife and younger children, while the older ones curl by the hearth or with the goats. You eat pottage, a thick stew of beans, barley, and whatever greens are growing, and hard black bread, often made with rye and sometimes flavored with bits of dried onion or herbs. Meat is rare. Ale is common, weak, and drunk daily. Water is for washing. Summer, labor, and lordship. The hardest days come in summer. The fields are alive and require constant weeding, thinning, and watching. The Lord's domain, the portion of land worked for his benefit, must be tended first. This is the heart of your obligation. During boon days, times when all villeins are required to work, the entire village labors on the domain. The reeve watches. The The bailiff sometimes inspects. There is little rest, but the work is social. You laugh, grumble, share bits of gossip, and pass jugs of warm ale between furrows. Your tools are simple: a wooden spade, a reaping hook, a fork of ash in your hands. You own little, and even these tools are borrowed or communal. Your clothing is rough-spun wool, often patched and always itchy. On Sundays, you attend Mass, though it is in Latin and you understand little. The priest speaks of sin and grace, but you are more concerned with weather and worms. Still, you believe. Heaven, hell, and purgatory are as real to you as the fields. You tithe what you can, often a sheaf of wheat or a chicken, and trust that Saint Cuthbert will watch over your livestock. The world beyond the fields. You rarely leave Wistow. Perhaps once a year, to attend a fair in Bridgnorth, where your wife trades for salt or pots and you look longingly at the knives and boots on display. The city is overwhelming, noisy, foul-smelling, and dangerous, but it is also mesmerizing. Sometimes rumors drift in. Of wars in Wales, of tax collectors sent by King Edward, of outlaws in the forests, but they seem distant. What matters more is whether the mill is working, whether the blacksmith's wife is still ill, or whether your neighbor's pigs are wandering again. And yet you are not ignorant. You know the names of saints, the cycles of the moon, and the signs of blight. You know how to graft a pear tree, how to brew ale from mash, and how to dress a wound. You know the rhythm of the soil, and you know the face of hunger. Autumn, harvest, and hope. As August wanes, harvest begins. It is all hands, men, women, and children in the fields from dawn to dusk. You cut wheat with your sickle, bind it into sheaves, and stack them in stooks to dry. The air smells of sweat and grain. The sun is harsh. Blisters form, but there is little time for complaint. After your own crop is gathered, you work again on the Lord's land, often under threat of fine if you delay. The gleaning rites allow your wife and children to collect leftover stalks, barely enough to make a loaf or two, but precious nonetheless. Once the grain is threshed and winnowed, you take your share to the Lord's mill, where you are charged to grind it. The miller keeps a portion for himself, a customary toll, but one that always feels a bit too large. By Michaelmas, September 29th, you offer your dues to the manor, a portion of grain, a piglet, a day's labor in the woods, and then you wait for winter. A life shaped by dirt. You are not free, but neither are you helpless. You are embedded in a web of obligation, routine, and hope. You are a cog in a system centuries old, and yet your daily toil feeds the kingdom, even if the king never knows your name. You don't dream of riches. You dream of a mild winter, a healthy calf, and enough grain to last until Easter. You hope your children survive the cough that always comes with the frost. You hope the reeve doesn't summon you again for gathering firewood where you shouldn't have. You live 1 year at a time, one harvest at a time, and as the wheel turns, you begin again. But what happens when that wheel breaks, when the routine fails, the weather turns, and the yield vanishes? What does a plowman do when the land itself no longer provides? The rhythms of the plowman's life are steady until they are. By 1281, in your 45th year, you feel the land shift beneath your feet. The earth is the same, but the seasons betray you. Rain comes at the wrong times. The barley rots in the ground. The hay harvest, crucial for overwintering your oxen, is meager. Something is breaking in the ancient cycle. And as always, the plowman is the first to suffer and the last to be heard. The lean year. It begins slowly. The spring of 1282 brings late frosts. Seeds sprout, then wither. You and your neighbors resow the oats, losing time and wasting grain you could ill afford. By summer, the weather turns wet. Your plow struggles in the thick, clotted soil. The team falters. The grain bends under its own weight, soaked and vulnerable to mold. Harvest comes late, and fast: cut what you can, dry what you dare. You save little for your own household. The Lord's domain takes precedence, and the mill still demands its toll. There is no negotiating with hunger. By Michaelmas, your family's grain chest is half empty. You salt what little pork you have. You dry leeks and onions in the smoke of your hearth. You pray the winter will be merciful. It is not. Hunger at the hearth. When winter tightens its grip, hunger becomes a daily companion. Not starvation, not yet, but the slow, steady thinning of body and resolve. Children grow pale. Your wife's fingers crack from cold and strain. You find yourself eating thinner pottage, using ground acorns to stretch the flour, boiling bones for the third time. There's no shame in this. Your neighbor does the same. But when you find yourself digging into the grain meant for spring planting, you feel the weight of the future crack beneath your present need. You consider selling one of your sheep, but so do your neighbors. The market is flooded. Prices plummet. A fat ewe sells for the price of a chicken in better years. The manor's reeve knocks on your door with the new dues for Lent. You offer firewood and a day's labor. He accepts, but not kindly. He too is thin this year. Manor justice. The manorial court continues, lean year or no. The rules remain fixed, though the ground beneath them shifts. You are fined for trespassing when your son gathers windfall apples in the Lord's orchard. A neighbor is punished for brewing ale too weak. Another is accused of taking fish from the Lord's stream. Justice, in these cases, is less about law and more about custom, reputation, and control. The reeve is no villain. He is one of you, elevated but bound by his own fears. He must deliver dues to the bailiff. The bailiff must please the steward. The steward answers to the Lord, who likely has never set foot in Wistow, preferring the comforts of his manor house in Bridgenorth. But there are rare moments when the court bends. In the court roll of 1283, it is recorded that 5 villeins had their dues deferred for a year due to crop injury and household strain. Small mercies, hard won. Quiet revolts. Not all bow quietly. One night in late spring, a small band of men slip into the domain pasture and cut the Lord's fences, letting their sheep graze forbidden grasses. No one speaks of it the next day, though everyone knows. A week later, the reeve organizes a night patrol. The fences are repaired, and a sermon is preached about obedience and sin. But a message was sent. Hunger has no patience for order. This is not rebellion. It is resistance, quiet, strategic, and desperate. The kind of resistance that leaves no scars but builds slowly, like damp in a wall. A world beyond the manor. You begin to hear stories from travelers and merchants, stories of famines in the north, of lords increasing rents, of entire manors abandoned when the land failed. Some younger men speak of fleeing to the towns, to Hereford, Worcester, even London, where work might be found in markets, docks, or monasteries. But you know the cost. To leave is to break the bond. A villain who flees risks being named a fugitive, pursued, fined, and possibly jailed. And yet some do it. By custom, if a villain can survive a year and a day in a town without being caught, he is free. But the risk is steep, and the road is long. You remain, not out of cowardice, but out of duty, roots, and fear. Your ancestors are buried here. Your children are growing, and the land, despite its betrayal, still needs you. Seeds of a new pattern. As the 1280s draw on, things slowly stabilize. The harvests recover, though never as bountiful as before. You and your neighbors begin rotating crops more carefully, leaving longer fallows, experimenting with bean plots and barley mixes to restore fertility. The Lord's steward, seeing his own yields fall, begins offering incentives, smaller fines, delayed dues, and even cash wages for extra work. For the first time, some villains handle coins regularly. You buy salt instead of bartering. You pay the miller instead of giving a portion of flour. A monetary economy, slow and subtle, begins to take hold even in the fields. The manor does not fall apart, but it shifts. A world built on fixed service begins to reckon with the idea of exchange. And you, the plowman, stand in the middle of it, not fully aware, but deeply involved. So as the soil adjusts and society bends, we are left to wonder. What happens when the plowman begins to count his worth in coin, not obligation? A generation later. It is now 1305. You are old by village standards, ancient. Nearly 70 winters have passed over your back. Your fingers are crooked with labor, your joints stiff from damp, but your mind is clear and your memories sharp. Your youngest grandson, Tomas, now guides the plow. He is stronger than you ever were, quicker with animals and curiously better with numbers. He counts seed ratios with smooth stones and marks field plots with sharpened sticks. He even signs his name poorly but confidently. The priest taught him. You watch him from the edge of the field, leaning on your stick, and see something you never expected. A world tilting toward change. Labor for coin. The years following the lean times brought shifts in the manorial order. Lords, sensing the unrest, the risk of flight, and the slow disintegration of blind obedience, began to offer alternatives. A villein could now, in many manners, pay coin in lieu of labor. It wasn't universal and not all could afford it, but for those who managed to sell eggs, cheese, or extra wool, the coins added up. Tomas, in his early 20s, earns 3 pence a week working the Reeves' private garden in winter, then plows the Lord's domain in spring for wages, not service. What was once a burden of birth is slowly becoming a contract of choice. He is not yet free, but he is negotiating with the chains. New tools, new ties. With wages come purchases. A new iron share for the plow, a second-hand harness with better leather, a knife from the Bridgenorth Fair that holds its edge through 2 harvests. These tools, minor though they seem, improve yield. More yield means more grain. More grain means more to eat or sell. And it isn't just the plow. Some villagers begin fencing off parts of their garden plots, experimenting with cabbages, onions, and beans. A few even keep beehives, trade wax, and begin sending daughters to nearby convent schools not for vows, but for learning. Tomas speaks of going to Shrewsbury, perhaps working in a merchant's stable just for a season. He would return for harvest, of course, always for harvest. Manor courts in the edge of law. The manor court still meets every month, though it feels different now. More disputes involve contracts over grazing, tool hire, or shared oxen than trespass or theft. The language of obligation is slowly blending with the language of rights. In 1303, your eldest son petitioned the court to commute his villein dues in favor of a fixed rent. The Lord agreed, seeing profit in the arrangement. For the first time, your family pays for its land, rather than working it under compulsion. There are still limits. You cannot leave the manor without license. The Lord still claims suit of court, Harriet, a death duty, and a portion of your harvest, but the grip loosens if only slightly. Even the church, once indifferent to the plowman's life, begins to notice. The priest now includes prayers for tradesmen in Sunday sermons. A traveling friar recently preached of dignity in labor, quoting scripture as he gestured toward the calloused hands in the pews. You wonder, is that new, or did no one bother saying it before? The hidden knowledge of the soil. You've never called yourself wise, but after 60 years with a plow, you've learned things no book teaches. You can tell the moisture of a furrow by the color of your boots. You know the behavior of crows before a bad frost. You can feel in the curve of the ox's yoke whether the beast is strong enough for the day. These things aren't written, but they're real. And now, for the first time, your grandson asks your advice with more than obedience, he asks it with interest. He wants to know how deep to seed barley, whether the new field to the east is worth clearing, whether a spring-sown oat is worth the risk. You tell him yes and no, and sometimes you say, try it, then you'll know. This too is education. Rumors from beyond. Travelers speak of more freeholders in the South, peasants who own their land outright. They speak of villages negotiating rents as a group, of some even refusing to pay dues entirely until their rights are recognized. You hear of clerks writing documents for peasants, marking agreements not by memory but by parchment and seal. This is new and dangerous. The steward, hearing the same stories, grows cautious. He lowers some fines, offers new leases, becomes friendlier in court, not out of charity but out of prudence. He has no interest in seeing the manor empty. And so, oddly, for the first time in memory, the balance of power begins to shift just a little toward the man with the mud on his boots. The plowman's testament. Before you die, and you know it will not be many years now, you pass on what matters. Not just the land, not just the ox yoke, but the stories, the knowledge, and the truth of survival. You tell Tomas that the land is both merciless and generous, that no harvest is guaranteed, that community matters more than strength, that laughter in the field is as necessary as manure, that a full belly is a blessing, not a right. You tell him that no matter what changes coin, contract, court, the earth still needs turning, the seed still needs sowing, and a hand that knows the feel of soil is never truly poor. He listens. You rest. Reflection, the forgotten foundation. The plowman's life was not glorious. He did not build cathedrals, pen chronicles, or command armies, but he was indispensable. He fed the masons who built the cathedrals, grew the grain that fed the scribes, provided the flour for the soldiers' bread. He was the spine of the kingdom. And while few chroniclers wrote of him, his life shaped the world. His slow, steady furrows carved the framework of society, his rhythms timed the medieval calendar, and his survival strategies modest, practical, persistent, defined an age. So now we step away from the manor and the plow, from the smoke-filled hearth and the muddy boots, and we ask, if civilization is built on the backs of workers, how many of those backs have we forgotten to name? Story 3. The Bridge Keepers of Regensburg. You are standing on a bridge, not a rickety wooden plank or a makeshift ferry landing, but a stone colossus, stretching boldly across the Danube River. Below you, the water churns and glides, dark and cold, flecked with sunlight and debris. Around you, carts creak with timber, monks murmur Latin, and wool merchants haggle over tolls. The year is 1250, and the Steinerne Brücke, the stone bridge of Regensburg, has already stood for over a century. It is more than a river crossing, it is a lifeline. But few think of the men who keep it standing, the laborers, sweepers, masons, and tollkeepers who tend its arches, manage its flow, and sleep in its shadow. You are one of them. The stone bridge. Built between 1135 and 1146, the stone bridge of Regensburg is an engineering feat for its time. With 16 mighty arches, it spans the Danube at a critical trading junction in southern Bavaria, linking Europe's growing economies from the Alps to the Baltic. Before its construction, river crossings were treacherous and seasonal. Flatboats could be overturned by current or ice. Wooden bridges collapsed under weight or fire, but the stone bridge, solid, wide, and immovable, opened year-round trade and gave Regensburg its reputation as a hub of commerce and control. It became known not just as a marvel, but as a symbol of permanence in a shifting medieval world. Yet behind that permanence lay constant work. Life beneath the bridge. Your name is Klaus, and your role is humble but vital. You are a bridge keeper, more a caretaker than a builder, more a watcher than a master. Your father tended this bridge before you, and your son likely will after. You rise before dawn, live in a stone house built into the bridge's base, and answer to the bridge office, a civic body of clerics and officials who oversee its tolls and maintenance. You are not a guildsman, though you work with them, often the masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, and boatmen who orbit the structure like bees around a hive. Your duties are varied. On some days you climb the arches and check for cracks, your fingertips brushing moss and frost. On others, you clear river debris lodged against the pier's logs, ice floes, or even drowned animals. Occasionally, you descend to the vaulted passageways within the bridge itself, checking the mortar for seepage, bringing lime and patchwork tools. You also sweep the roadway, guiding cart traffic when the weather turns, and shoveling snow through bitter winters. The bridge cannot be allowed to ice over slips are costly, and deaths become liabilities. Most importantly, you report anything unusual, the sounds of shifting stone, sudden cracks in the masonry, surges in water levels to the bridge office. Because if the bridge fails, the city fails. Toll and control. At its southern end stands the bridge gate, a fortified tower where travelers pay the toll, one of the most lucrative revenue streams in Regensburg. Tollkeepers are civil servants, well paid and fiercely watched. The fees are fixed by imperial decree. Merchants pay more than pilgrims. Wagons are charged by axle and boats passing beneath by cargo weight. Locals complain, outsiders grumble, but the fees are paid. You don't handle the coins, but you do handle the consequences of non-payment. A toll dodger once tried to bypass the gate by crossing at night on foot. He slipped, broke his leg, and nearly drowned. You pulled him from the icy current, and for your trouble were given half a loaf of bread and a nod from the watchman. Justice, like the river, runs cold. Flood and ice. The greatest threat to the bridge is not man but nature. The Danube is unpredictable, gentle in summer, monstrous in thaw. In spring, when alpine snow melts upstream, the water rises sharply. It gnaws at the piers, churns at the base, loosens stones, and lifts whole trees against the arches. Your worst fear is an ice jam. In winters past, sheets of ice stacked at the piers, lifting and cracking the arches. In 1210, a large floe smashed through 2 central arches, and repairs took 8 months. During such events, you are on the bridge day and night. Fire barrels are lit along the parapets to soften the ice. Workers bash at floes with poles and ropes. And you, wrapped in soaked wool and frozen boots, crawl along the edge to report weak spots. One slip and you're gone. Yet you return every time. The hidden world within. Few know what lies beneath the bridge: vaulted passageways, drainage channels, arched galleries, and storage spaces carved into the stonework. Here, tools are stored, records kept, sometimes even criminals held temporarily until the city guard arrives. You've walked these passages 100 times. You know the dark by feel: the warmth of dry brick, the smell of damp lime, the eerie echo of water lapping below. Once you found a bird's nest in a crevice, lined with hair and scraps of cloth. Another time, a stonemason left behind a chisel, its handle worn smooth by decades of use. You left it there. Some tools deserve to rest where they worked. These places feel sacred not with incense or chant, but with labor and time. A city's artery. The bridge is not just a structure. It is a living thing, pulsing with life. Each morning, pilgrims walk north toward the shrines of Bohemia. Merchants roll barrels of salt, wine, wool, and iron across its span. Monks from nearby abbeys cross with donkeys in tow. Children run, play, get scolded. Dogs follow the carts. Cats curl beneath the parapet stones. You know the bridge by its sounds: the creak of axles, the shod hooves, the slap of rope on wood, and in the stillest hours, the murmur of water beneath. You also know the bridge by its people. Marta, the baker's daughter, who brings hot loaves across at dawn. Ulrich, the monk who stops to pray on the central span each morning. Baldwin, a Flemish trader who winks as he passes, always with new boots. You are part of their world, invisible but enduring. Reputation and respect. You are not noble, you are not rich, but you are trusted. The bridge keeper is known for his vigilance. When floods come, people ask you what to expect. When the wind howls, they ask if the bridge is safe. When strangers ask directions, you guide them not just to places, but to understanding the city's heart. Once a year during Bridge Day, the Bishop of Regensburg walks the span and blesses the structure. On that day, your name is read aloud not from a pulpit, but from the office's ledger. Not glory, but acknowledgement. That's enough. You keep this bridge not because it is yours, but because it belongs to everyone. You are not its builder, not its architect, but its custodian. And as the carts pass, and the ice floes melt, and the stone warms in spring sun, you wonder. When the builders are forgotten, who remembers those who kept the stones from falling? The toll house ledger. Every evening, before the lamps are lit and the shutters closed, the toll house clerk records the day's traffic in the bridge ledger. Today's entry includes 6 wagons of wool from Augsburg, 14-foot pilgrims bound for Bohemia, 1 barrel of preserved fish from Passau, a convoy of 3 knights and retainers, northbound, unpaid but marked with seal, a timber raft escorted by 4 boatmen, toll settled in salt. Your name is not in the ledger. It never is. Yet without your work, your repairs, your signals, your warnings, none of it happens safely. The bridge runs on stone and coin, yes, but also on the unnoticed hands that keep its breath steady. The business of stone. By 1250, Regensburg is booming. The bridge is part of what makes it possible. It links Bavaria to the broader Holy Roman Empire, allows passage of armies, goods, and pilgrims, and collects wealth for the city's bishop and burghers alike. But it also demands maintenance. You've learned to recognize when an arch keystone is shifting, when mortar is thinning, when a stone's face is spalling from freeze and thaw. The masons, guild-trained and proud, often consult you before patching anything. You know the flow. You know the tone the stones make when tapped. Occasionally, you're called to help the civic masons when they reinforce the piers. You help mix lime mortar, lift rough-hewn stones, ferry buckets, and secure scaffold ropes. This work is neither fast nor glorious. Repairs are quiet emergencies, done before failure becomes spectacle, done to prevent collapse from being tomorrow's sermon. Encounters on the bridge. One spring morning, a pilgrim collapses midway across the bridge, heatstroke or fasting. You're unsure. You and the wool merchant nearby lift him, carry him to the small guard chamber, and offer him bread and water. When he wakes, he mutters thanks in half Latin, half French. He's bound for Prague. Another time, an ox slips on wet stone. The wagon overturns, spilling barrels into the river. You help the driver free the beast. You wade waist deep to pull 2 barrels back before they're lost downstream. He offers you a silver pfennig, which you refuse. You'll need it more, you say. Winter hasn't left yet. These moments are fleeting, but they accumulate, not as history, but as human memory. You are becoming part of the bridge's character. Flood season. The Danube is a teacher without mercy. In 1254, a late thaw and days of rain bring the water to a dangerous height. You can hear the river's anger before you see it. The distant groaning of current, the crack of wood, the dull thud of drift striking the piers. Within hours, the central arches are submerged halfway up their span. The current is swift. You and 3 other keepers rope yourselves together, inching along the southern edge, placing warning markers, lighting pitch lamps to signal danger. By nightfall, one of the auxiliary arches begins to tremble. The next morning, a small section of the parapet collapses, the stones tumbling into the foaming water. No one is hurt, but the toll house is closed for a week. Merchants complain. The bishop sends an envoy. The bridge office launches an inquiry. You are not blamed, quite the opposite. Your name is mentioned as one who reported the fissure a day early, who lit the night lamp when others slept. You are given half a loaf of honeyed bread, a clean tunic from the city storehouse, and a wordless nod from the steward. These are your medals. The specter of war. In 1256, war nears the river. Regensburg is not under siege, but tensions between local lords and the imperial authority have grown. Knights now cross the bridge in greater numbers. Some wear the Black Cross of the Teutonic Order. Others display no insignia at all. The city guard stations 2 men permanently at the bridge gate. Their job is to collect tolls, but also to watch. You begin to hear rumors. A village burned upriver, a skirmish at a monastery, a dispute over salt rights. The merchants grow cautious. A few wagons turn back. You remember your father's stories of military passage when crossbowmen marched across the bridge, their carts filled with quarrels, their horses too lean, their eyes too young. It's happening again. You reinforce the barred gate beneath the toll tower, check the escape hatch leading under the southern arch, and consult the masons about possible boiling oil holes, though the steward says it's just a precaution. The bridge is not just a passage, it is a choke point. And when war crosses it, everything changes. The life of a keeper. Your days blend. Wake with the bells, walk the bridge before sunrise, note the frost, the loosened stone, the gathered wind, help unload barrels for the masons, mark the ledgers, wash your hands in the Danube, warm your bread near the parapet fire. In the afternoon, you share lunch with the blacksmith's boy. He's learning to shape iron nails for the bridge's railings. In the evening, you walk the arches again. The sun sets behind the steeples of Regensburg, casting gold across the water. You rarely leave the bridge. When you do, it's only to fetch supplies or visit the chapel. You live in a room no wider than a wagon above the mid-arch guard post. It's cold in winter, stifling in summer, but it's yours. Some nights you listen to the water speaking through the stones, echoing in the vaults like a chant. Other nights, you dream of bridges collapsing, of stones dissolving into mud, of cartwheels broken and voices crying out in the dark. Then you wake, check the keystones, and go back to work. The invisible hero. No one remembers bridge keepers in songs or chronicles. There are no tapestries of you holding tools, no saints carved in your image. But the bridge stands. And as long as it stands, you have purpose. You think of this as you light the beacon lamp at dusk, its flame swaying gently in the wind. You think of it as a Flemish merchant crosses, tipping his hat, and a barefoot pilgrim murmurs a blessing. You think of it when the Danube roars and when it sleeps. You are not immortal, but your work may be. As the city grows and empires rise and fall beyond the banks, we're left to ask, when a civilization is built on infrastructure, who are the ones beneath it carrying it, stone by stone, with no name but duty? A new keeper. It is 1272. You are no longer the man who walks the parapets before dawn. That task now belongs to your apprentice, Matha's a wiry lad with clever hands, a steady foot, and a cautious eye. You trained him yourself. He listens to the stones like you taught him, and he fears the river as he should. You've moved into a quieter rhythm, still living in your room built into the bridge tower, but now more often observing than laboring. Your hands no longer carry lime buckets or drive wedges, but your counsel still carries weight in the bridge office. When an arch hums strangely or an ox cart splinters against the rail, they still call for Klaus. You smile quietly, not from pride, but from the knowledge that your care was never wasted. The bridge through others' eyes. It is strange at times to see how others view the bridge. To the merchant, it is a ledger of costs. To the pilgrim, it is a passage to sanctity. To the knight, it is a strategic prize. To the child, it is simply part of the world, like trees and sky. But to you and to those like you, it is something else entirely. It is memory stone-bound. It is a thing built not once, but every day cleaned, reinforced, guarded. It is made not just of limestone and mortar, but of routine, habit, and vigilance. You remember the bridge in flood when the arches trembled under pressure and ice. You remember it in fog, invisible but present, echoing with footfalls. You remember it in heat, when the stone seared the souls of passing monks, and in winter, when carts had to be pulled across with ropes to avoid slipping into the river. You remember because you were always there. Changes beneath the surface. Regensburg continues to grow. The merchant quarter expands near the south end of the bridge. New warehouses rise, taller and more ambitious than before. The bishop's palace is refurbished. Even the guilds, once wary of bridge funding, now contribute willingly. They know what failure would cost. The stone bridge, once feared as a risky novelty, has become the foundation of the city's identity. And so the keepers adapt. Matthäus experiments with new patching techniques, using heated wax and sand to fill surface cracks before frost can widen them. Another keeper suggests iron clamps embedded in key joints. The masons initially scoff until they see how the metal holds through the spring thaw. You record these changes. Not in books, your letters are shaky, but in word of mouth, in training, and in your apprentices' hands. The flood of 1277. In late March of 1277, the Danube rises again. Heavy alpine melt, accelerated by warm winds and spring rains, sends a torrent downstream. For 2 days the water creeps higher. On the third day it surges. One of the piers, the 10th, trembles beneath the strain. The water licks the arch stones. Tree limbs strike like battering rams. Mud and silt swirl in the current, black and fast. Matthäus and the others light signal fires. Traffic is halted. The south gate is closed. The guard refuses passage, and crowds gather to watch the water test the city's oldest friend. Through the night you sit in the watch chamber, counting creaks and groans. You feel the pressure in the floor. The whole bridge seems to breathe, exhale, then hold its breath again. At dawn, the waters begin to recede. The bridge stands. One parapet is lost. 2 upper stones need replacement, but the arches hold. You weep not for relief, but for recognition. This is what your life has been for. Stone doesn't thank you, but it remembers. The quiet retirement. By 1280, your knees ache more than usual. Your eyesight dims. You begin to walk the bridge only once a week, now a figure of quiet reverence, familiar to all but known deeply by few. Matthäus is now the chief keeper. He trains his own assistant. The bridge office promotes him formally, and they grant you an annual pension, modest but enough. You decline to leave your tower room. You tell them, "The bridge has been my roof longer than any house would know what to do with me." They agree. Sometimes travelers stop to ask directions. They don't know who you are. You guide them with a steady hand and a few words. They thank you, then hurry on, their boots tapping over stones you once hauled yourself. You sit and listen to the river. The bridge still speaks to you, not in words but in weight, pressure, and rhythm. Legacy without inscription. There is no monument to the bridge keepers of Regensburg. No plaque, no carved statue, no sung verse in the cathedral choir. Yet your work lives on in every safe crossing, every undisturbed trade route, every pilgrim's footstep, every child's game. Your story, like the mortar between the stones, is invisible, but essential. You know this, and you are at peace. A wider reflection. The stone bridge of Regensburg would stand for centuries. It would witness emperors, traders, revolts, plagues, and progress. It would survive floods, frost, fire, and even war. And yet, the bridge keepers, those quiet, persistent custodians, would rarely be remembered in the written record. Their names faded, their roles taken for granted. But every time a wheel turned across dry stone, every time a cart passed safely, their labor spoke. They were caretakers of trust, living reminders that progress is not always forged in invention, but maintained in discipline, routine, and unsung service. So now, as we leave the bridge behind its arches stoic, its river eternal, we ask, if infrastructure is built once but preserved daily, whose stories have slipped into the mortar, unnoticed, but holding up the world all the same. Story 4. The village bell, timekeeping before clocks. You do not know what time it is, not exactly, but you hear it. A single low bell somewhere in the distance, then another sharper, higher pitched in response. It rings 3 times, then pauses, then rings again. You don't count the strokes, you don't need to, you've heard it all your life. It's prime, the first call to prayer after dawn. You stretch your limbs under the straw blanket, rub your eyes and rise. Your name is Agnes, and you live in the village of Hazelbrook, in the English Shire of Wiltshire, sometime in the late 1200s. You don't have a sundial, you've never seen a clock, but still your life runs on time. The world of no clocks. Before clocks were common, even before most villages had towers, the medieval world still had time. But it was sounded, not seen. Most people couldn't read. Fewer still could reckon by hourglass or astrolabe, but everyone knew what a bell meant. The village bell, mounted high in the chapel gable, swung by a rope pulled from the chancel floor, marked out not just prayers, but work, meals, and rest. It was your signal, your reminder, your social contract. In Hazelbrook, the bell was tended by old Wymond, the sacristan, whose hearing was sharp despite his age, and whose hands pulled the rope with practiced rhythm. Each bell had its own character. This one was named Mildred, cast in tin and copper and installed sometime around 1240. It gave a clear, slightly uneven tone, a little flat after frost, a little sharp in heat, but it told time without fault. Time by sound. There are 8 canonical hours, though most layfolk recognize only a few. Matins, deep night, rarely heard unless there's a vigil. Lauds, before sunrise. Prime dawn, the start of the workday. Terce, mid-morning break. Sext, midday rest. None, mid-afternoon return to work. Vespers, sunset. Compline, evening prayer, just before sleep. The bell marked prime, sext, and vespers with consistency. These were the rhythm of rural life. You learned it by ear, a 3-stroke pause for prime, a double ring for sext, a long tone and short chime for vespers. No one taught you this, you simply absorbed it. Timekeeping without numbers. When not marked by bell, time was sensed. The length of a shadow. The sun's warmth on your back. The angle of light through a doorway. The crowing of roosters. The change in birdsong from morning to noon. Agnes's grandmother used to say, "If the dew's still cold, it's not yet time to fetch the goats." Another woman in the village taught her that if the crows were silent, it was past sext. No one questioned it. Time wasn't precise, it didn't need to be, it was felt, not forced. The sacristan and the rope. Old Wymond, the bell keeper, lived just behind the chapel in a thatched cottage overgrown with ivy. He rose before all others, tending to lamp oil, altar cloths, and of course the bell. His days were ruled not by what he wanted to do, but by what needed sounding. He counted not hours, but space between sun and shadows, between Millicent's first loaf in the oven and the shepherds leading sheep from the paddock. The bell rope was worn smooth. A groove in the chapel's floor marked where he had stood for 30 years. On feast days, he rang with flourish, sounding the octave. On fast days, his tone was more reserved. The villagers never saw him as powerful, but when he missed a bell once when fevered, it shook the village. Bakers hesitated. Shepherds waited. The children asked if something was wrong with the sky. That day the manor reeve sent his own son to ring the bell. It sounded too early. The sound was wrong. Everything was off until vespers. No one said it aloud, but the bell was part of the village body. The bell and the field. In the fields the bell was distant but not lost. The sound carried especially in frost or damp. When the sext bell rang, you paused to eat cold bread and onions, maybe a boiled egg. When vespers chimed, you began to walk home. For shepherds, plowmen, and field gleaners, the bell marked permission to begin, to stop, to rest. If you missed it, time folded strangely. You arrived home too early. You interrupted meals. You were out of step with your neighbors. To be in sync with the bell was to be in step with the world. The bell as judge. Time was also moral. To miss prime without cause, a sign of laziness. To linger too long after sex, gluttony or gossip. To labor past vespers, greed or pride. The bell wasn't just time, it was judgment. Not harsh but communal. On market days, the bell rang longer. During Lent, its tone was changed. During funerals, it tolled slowly, once for each decade of the dead's life. And when the plague came, the bell tolled constantly twice a day, then 3, then not at all when Wymond himself fell ill. That year, the silence was worse than the tolling. The sounds between. There were other sounds, too unofficial but all known. The distant clatter of the millstone beginning its grind. The horn of the swineherd. The creak of the baker's oven door at dawn. The soft echo of hooves over stone just after Compline. But these weren't timekeepers. They were confirmation that the bell had spoken true. They filled the space between the tolls, reminders that time was made by people, confirmed by labor, and affirmed in sound. And so you lived not by the clock, but by the ringing of the sky, a world where everyone shared the same hours, not because of a dial, but because they heard them together. But what happens when time is no longer communal, when the bell gives way to the wheel, and the hour becomes private? What becomes of time when it's no longer heard, but watched? The bell as anchor. By 1290, Hazelbrook is unchanged in shape but subtly different in rhythm. The fields still stretch in rough strips. The village still huddles around the chapel like stones around a hearth. But new habits take root not from within, but from beyond. The bell still rings. Old Wymond now gone, replaced by Joan, his daughter. A rare thing but not unheard of. She learned by watching him, knew when to ring, knew how to pull, knew the sound Mildred made after frost, after thunder, after silence. The villagers accept her, not because of sentiment, but because she keeps time right. The butcher slaughters on the day she rings sext at exactly mid-shadow. The smith douses his coals when vespers comes from Joan's rope, not from the sun. The bell is still the village's metronome. It doesn't chime hours, it calls behavior. And in this, it does more than any clock ever could. Time as collective agreement. To live by the bell is to live by consent. It is social time. No one owns it. No one sets it for personal gain. The bell doesn't change with whim or season. It simply continues swinging, sounding, anchoring the day. Time, then, is not fixed by measurement. It is held by memory, confirmed by agreement. Everyone knows that when Joan rings at dawn, the village rises, that when she rings at dusk, it rests. Even those too old to work still watch for it. And children learn the day's shape by its music long before they can speak in full sentences. This agreement is powerful. It creates structure in an unstructured world. The rains may delay planting. The mill may jam. The cow may die, but the bell keeps swinging. The first disruption. One day, a merchant wagon arrives early, too early. It rolls into the village just after dawn, long before prime. The mill is not yet open. The steward's chest isn't ready. Joan hasn't even lit the chapel lamps. The merchant, impatient, curses the laziness of the village. He claims his sundial says it's well past the 3rd hour. He demands the steward's attention. No one moves. Finally, Joan steps out of the chapel, points at the bell and says, "The day hasn't started." The merchant laughs. The day doesn't wait for your bell. But he waits anyway. Because without the bell, no one will open their doors. This is the first time you hear someone question the bell. It stirs something uncomfortable. The idea that time might exist elsewhere, differently, begins to creep in. A second sound. In 1295, something new arrives. The abbey 2 towns over, flush with wool prophets and eager to impress visiting prelates, installs a water-driven clock. Not for the monks, they still rise and pray by canonical hours, but as a sign of wealth and sophistication. It chimes, not beautifully but predictably, a short clang on the hour every hour from a bronze hammer striking a mounted bell. Soon after, nearby towns imitate them. Some add mechanical dials, others just more bells. You don't see these clocks, but travelers speak of them. One mason says, "It clangs like a mule's shoe, but by God it's exact." Another scoffs, "Too fast in heat, too slow in frost." Still, the idea spreads that time might be measured, not merely shared, that it can be owned, corrected, and counted. Change creeps slowly. Hazelbrook does not rush to adopt a mechanical clock. There's no money and no need. The bell suffices. Joan keeps swinging it. The village keeps listening. But something small begins to shift. The steward begins asking for work tallies in hours, not tasks. A cloth merchant passing through sells a marked wax dial for sun tracking. A visiting monk tells the priest that hours will soon be told by machines, not rope. These aren't revolutions, they're seeds. And you, a farmer now in your 50s, begin to sense a strange unease. You wonder if time belongs to a machine, who does it obey? Time becomes commodity. For the first time in the year 1298, you are paid by the hour. A visiting scribe commissioned to copy a legal scroll asks for laborers to help carry his table and inks. He offers a silver penny per hour, marks the time with a sand glass, and insists that the work be paced accordingly. You and 2 others accept. It's fine work, easy coin. But the hourglass unnerves you. It watches, measures, expects. When you finish, the scribe smiles and says, "A tidy hour and a quarter." You say nothing. You've never thought of life in quarters of hours. Later that week, you miss the sext bell while in the field, measuring furrows by paces, not rhythm. When you return, the bread is cold. Your wife frowns. You say you lost track of time. She says time isn't something to track, it's something to feel. You don't answer. But that night, you listen to the Vespers bell longer than usual. Joan grows old. Joan is gray now. Her hands ache. The bell rope is harder to pull in winter. She trains a younger boy, Peter, to ring it on stormy days or feast days. He's strong but impatient. He asks her once, "Why not let someone build a clock?" She replies, "Because the bell tells time by our needs. A clock tells it by its own." The boy nods, but you know he doesn't understand. Neither did you at first. But now you begin to realize the bell is the village's voice, a shared sound, a communal contract. A clock once installed would chime whether anyone listened or not. It would flatten the hours into sameness. It wouldn't wait for frost, for fog, or for the sheep to finish crossing. It would be indifferent. The bell was never indifferent. Now, with time becoming something to be measured instead of heard, we must ask, what do we lose when we stop listening to time and start controlling it instead? The last feast with the bell. It is 1304, and Hazelbrook is preparing for the feast of St. Cuthbert, the patron of wandering monks and those who mend broken things. You and others sweep the chapel yard, pluck herbs for stew, and hang ribbons on the linden trees. Joan, now nearing 70, rings the first Vespers bell of the feast with her usual grace, a long, steady sound that carries into the far meadows and trembles in the rafters of the bakehouse. You pause your work, everyone does. You've heard this bell all your life, not just its tone but the hands behind it. This will be the last time Joan rings it for a feast. Her joints have worsened. The cold has crept into her arms, and she has named her successor, Peter, now grown, steady, and clever with ropes. The village accepts this. There is no argument, but beneath the celebration, there's a sense of passing, something slipping quietly away without much ceremony. After all, there's still bread to bake, grain to store, fields to tend. Even as time changes, life must go on. The arrival of a clock. Not long after Joan's retirement, a letter arrives from the abbey in the nearby town of Malbury. They are offering, as a gift to Hazelbrook, a mechanical clock crafted by a German monk trained in the city of Nuremberg, where such devices are becoming more common. It will strike 4 times a day, they say. It will require little labor. It will bring the village into alignment with modern devotion. The steward is eager. He calls a meeting. The priest nods solemnly. The villagers murmur. Joan says nothing. You say nothing. The clock is accepted. It will be installed in spring. The silence before the hour. In the months that follow, Peter continues to ring the bell as taught morning, midday, and evening. He has a good rhythm. He pulls with care, but there is less reverence now. The children mock the bell tones, mimicking its peal in song. A few villagers mention how Malbury's bell is louder. The steward begins saying, "Let's meet at the 3rd hour instead of after sext." He carries a small pocket dial, no bigger than a walnut, marked with noon and night. He trusts it more than the sky. You find yourself looking up more often just to be sure time hasn't shifted when you weren't watching. It hasn't, but it's begun to feel different. The clock installed. The clock arrives in pieces, carried by ox cart. Brass gears wrapped in cloth, a bell no larger than a child's head, wooden casing, lead weights like river stones. It is installed high in the chapel gable, just above where Mildred, the village bell, still hangs. The monk who installs it says little. He works for 2 weeks straight, assisted by Peter and 2 carpenters. He is meticulous. When the clock first chimes, it's underwhelming. A short, single note, flat and dry, like the knock of a spoon on a bowl. People nod, a few clap politely. But when it chimes again, exactly 1 hour later, even Peter looks up. It is consistent. Cold perhaps, but consistent. A shift in the wind. By midsummer, the manual bell rings less. Peter now relies on the clock to call villagers to chapel. No more counting the shadows. No more checking the rooster's crow. No more watching dew dry on the barley. Time now tells itself. You still wake before dawn, though now the world feels slightly off. The bell rings earlier than your bones expect, sometimes later, but never wrongly. The clock is accurate. But you wonder if accurate is the same as true. Others feel it too, though they don't say it aloud. The rhythm has changed. No one is late, but no one is quite in time either. Children begin learning hours, not bells. Time becomes something to hold, to possess, not just to live within. Joan's reflection. You visit Joan one late autumn afternoon. She sits by her fire mending a basket. Her eyes are dim, her fingers slow, but her mind is sharp. You ask her what she thinks of the clock. She shrugs. It does its job, but it doesn't care who's listening. You both fall silent. Then she adds, almost as an afterthought. The bell used to sound for us. The clock just sounds. A world of divided hours. By 1310, Hazelbrook is not radically different. The fields are still plowed. The chapel still holds mass. The market still runs on Thursdays. But the sense of time has changed, subtly, gradually, profoundly. Where once villagers waited for the bell to begin, now they race the hour. Where once time passed with them, now it pulls ahead. Children grow up knowing what 3 o'clock means. The communal day gives way to individual schedules. And the bell, still there, still rung on feast days, still remembered, but no longer the center. Just an echo. Echoes into the future. Centuries from now, historians will marvel at the medieval bell as a technological marvel, not because it was complex, but because it worked without exactness. It created time not by measurement, but by meaning. It taught communities to live together, to rise and rest as one. It made sound a form of trust. And while the mechanical clock brought precision, it also severed time from context. It taught people to obey the hour, not understand it. The bell did not mark time. It marked us. And so we leave Hazelbrook not with the tolling of vespers, but with the quiet click of a gear turning in a tower, watched by no one, obedient only to itself. We are left with one lingering question. When time is measured but no longer shared, do we gain control or lose connection? Story 5. Benedictine Bakers Feeding the Monastery. The first hour of the day begins not with prayer but with flour. It's 2:00 in the morning and the stone floor is still cold under your sandals. You carry your breath like a cloak in the chill. Beyond the cloister walls, the world sleeps. But in the bakery, the monastery begins to wake. You are Brother Thomas, a lay brother in the Benedictine Abbey of St. Leontius, nestled in the hills of Anjou, France. It is the year 1247, and your task before lauds, before light, before even the sparrows stir is simple. Make enough bread to feed 60 men. The baker's cloister. The rule of Saint Benedict, written 6 centuries before, governs nearly every part of your life. It says nothing directly about baking, but it does say a great deal about work, humility, and serving your brothers. And so you rise long before the choir monks. As a lay brother, you are not expected to sing the office in full, but you live by the bell just the same. You cross the dark cloister with practiced steps, pass beneath the kitchen arch, and open the small wooden door into the bakery, your chapel of fire and flour. Inside, it smells of old yeast, smoke, and stored grain. The oven is a low stone dome, blackened from years of ash. The fire has been burning since last night's final, baking a deep, slow heat, ideal for bread. You begin the day in silence. Ingredients of obedience. The monastery's bread is not fancy. There are no spices, no oils, no raisins or nuts. This is not a feast hall. This is bread for sustaining prayer. Each day, you prepare 3 types of loaves. Daily bread, a coarse mix of wheat, rye, and barley, baked round. Each monk receives one with the noon meal. Communion bread, unleavened, small, flat, stamped with a carved cross. These are set aside for the altar. Charity loaves, smaller rounds, made from yesterday's dough, distributed to the poor at the gate. You measure by eye and hand, not scale. A good baker knows the weight of water by its sound in the bowl, the dryness of flour by how it coats the skin. The yeast is sourdough, a mother starter kept alive for years. Its personality changes with the seasons, slow in winter, eager in summer. You feed it gently, a little flour, a little water, a whispered prayer. This morning it smells strong, tangy, and right. You nod to yourself and begin. A silent symphony. You mix by hand. No spoons, no scrapers, no machines. You kneel before the wooden trough, plunging arms into dough that clings like penance. You fold, turn, stretch. Your fingers ache in the cold, but soon the friction warms you. You begin to sweat. This is your form of ora et labora, prayer and work. The Benedictines believe both are sacred. The kitchen is no less holy than the chapel. You do not speak, the only sounds are the creak of the trough, the hiss of fire, the rustle of flour sacks, the rhythm of breath and kneading. Sometimes a hymn drifts in faintly from the dormitory. You do not join it, but you match its rhythm with your kneading. The timing of the loaves. The fire must be perfect, too hot and the crust blackens, too cool and the center stays damp. You test the oven with a handful of flour, tossed on the stone floor. If it scorches in 3 breaths, the heat is right. The loaves rise under cloth for 1 hour, just enough time to clean the workspace, stoke the embers, and prepare the peel, a long-handled wooden paddle. By the time you place the rounds into the oven, the bell rings for lauds. The monks rise to chant the dawn office. You do not join them. Instead, you bow toward the sound, whisper the psalm in your heart, and return to the fire. Meals built on bread. By mid-morning, the bread is cooling. The daily loaves are arranged on a wooden shelf, each with a chalk mark for dietary need, a line for older monks, a cross for the infirm, nothing at all for the abbot. The infirmary receives special loaves soaked in broth, soft, easy to chew. Bread here is not just food, it is medicine. The charity loaves are carried to the porter's lodge. You see a small boy waiting near the gate, hands clasped in prayer. His face is thin, but he does not beg. The monks give freely, but only what is made for giving. You offer him a warm round. He smiles, thanks the Virgin, and runs. You fed a dozen brothers and the child of a stranger. That is a good morning. A monk's diet. Despite fasting rules and ascetic ideals, Benedictine monks are not underfed. Bread is the anchor of every meal. Vegetables, cheese, dried fish, and wine may come and go, but bread is constant. On feast days, the bread is slightly whiter, sifted from finer flour. On fast days, it's darker, rougher, made with more bran and less yeast. But never is it wasted. Even stale bread becomes pottage thickener or livestock feed. Once during Lent, a novice accidentally dropped 2 loaves into the basin. He wept. The prior scolded him. You simply sliced the wet bread, dried it in the oven, and served it toasted the next day. There is no shame in error, only in waste. The humble hierarchy. As a lay brother, you do not hold rank among the choir monks. You don't study Latin texts. You rarely speak in chapter meetings. Your robes are coarser, your bedding thinner. But in the bakery, you are essential. Even the abbot nods when he sees you working the dough. He knows that without bread, the office grows faint, the body grows weary, the rule falters. Bread is not just food. It is structure. It is humility and practice. It is the fuel of contemplation. And so your day begins again, not with the pealing of bells, but with the crackling of fire and the rise of dough. In flour-covered hands, you shape the monastic day, long before its prayers are spoken. But what happens when bread becomes abundance, not discipline? When the silence of work is replaced by the noise of trade? The bread that multiplies. By the year 1256, nearly a decade into your quiet baking life, the Abbey of St. Leontius has grown. Not dramatically, not like the walled towns of Burgundy or the shipping ports of Rouen, but subtly like yeast in a bowl. More pilgrims come, more novices join, and with each new brother more mouths to feed. The bakery is expanded, another oven added. 2 new lay brothers arrive to learn the rhythms of flour and fire. You are no longer just a servant of dough, you are now a teacher, though no parchment declares it. You show them how to read the heat by color, how to weigh flour by memory, how to knead in silence, and how to tell when bread has risen just by the feel of its skin beneath the cloth. Still, the ovens are hotter now, not just from fire but from pressure. The rule says, all things in moderation, but growth is a form of temptation too. The outside world presses in. Trade winds blow softly, even inside cloisters. A merchant from Tours offers to sell the abbey white flour, ground fine, sifted through silk, smoother than anything your mill has ever produced. It is expensive, but the abbot agrees to try it once, for Feast of the Nativity. You bake the flour. It smells faintly sweet. The crust forms with a crackle, the crumb light and soft. The monks are delighted. Some whisper it reminds them of heavenly manna. A week later, the abbot sends for more. You oblige, but something feels different. The dough is easier, yes, but lacks character. It does not respond the same. It doesn't live in your hands the way coarse dough does. Still, the order stands. You bake. By Easter, white bread is served at the abbot's table twice a week. The murmur of indulgence. Not all monks approve. One old cantor shakes his head at the new loaves. It smells of pride, he mutters. Another novice jokes, what next, butter in the broth? No one is angry, but the silence grows thicker. You, who once knew every hand that broke the bread you shaped, now deliver trays without names. The kitchen brothers portion the loaves by rank. You simply bake. Bread is no longer equal. You mention this to Brother Elaine, the cellarer. He frowns. Some bread feeds the soul, he says. Some keeps the body from failing. Let each have what he needs. But you remember when the rule said all monks eat alike, except the ill. That difference, the one that crept in with silk-sifted flour, feels deeper than grain. The kitchen's other hunger. One evening, while checking the ovens for cooling embers, you overhear the kitchen master speaking with a merchant. They're discussing wine deliveries, goat cheese, even almond paste delicacies once unthinkable in the refectory. You are not shocked. You've known for years that feast days grew more lavish, but now the supplies come not as gifts or surplus but as orders. Purchased, contracted, counted in coin. You begin to wonder, what does moderation mean when the monastery can afford so much? You think of the charity loaves still made daily, still given, but now smaller, fewer, often made from flour sweepings while the white rounds go to the scriptorium. One morning, a poor woman at the gate turns the bread over in her hands, frowns slightly, but thanks you all the same. That moment sits with you longer than it should. A question of the rule. You revisit the rule of Saint Benedict, tucked into the small library behind the cloister garden. You find the passage. Let all receive according to their need, but with no favoritism. Let moderation be practiced in all things. There is no mention of flour types, but there is mention of sufficiency, of community, of equality at table. You close the book and return to the ovens. The fire feels hotter. You begin keeping two ledgers. The official one for flour weight, meal counts, deliveries. The private one in your mind, tracking what has changed and why. The abbot's loaf. One day you are summoned to bake a special loaf, a gift for the visiting bishop. It must be shaped with a double braid, glazed with egg, and marked with a cross of clove buds. This is not sacrilege. Special bread has always existed for communion, for honoring saints, for hospitality. But the abbot asks you to make one for his table as well. You do it, but later, as you scrape flour from your sleeves, you hear a novice whisper to another. Didn't he say no favors? You say nothing, but something inside you feels cracked like a loaf left too long in the oven. The memory of simplicity. In a rare moment of reflection, you return to the bakery logbooks not for numbers, but for names. You see the early records, lists of guests fed during famine, entries marked extra loaves for the sick, days when bread ran short, but all were given half portions equally. You compare them to the current records, white flour, merchant names, preferred delivery times. You wonder, has the monastery grown outward or drifted inward? And yet the fire still burns, the bread still feeds, the rule still stands. You are not bitter, only watchful. The ovens keep baking, the loaves keep rising, but now each round holds more than flour and water, it holds a question. When daily bread becomes something to improve, to refine, to possess, what happens to the soul that once found peace in its simplicity? The fire fades, the bread remains. It is now the year 1265, and you, Brother Thomas, are an old man. Your hands are cracked, your knees stiff. You can no longer knead a full batch of dough without resting, and the oven's once warm companions feel hotter now, their breath more punishing. Still, you rise before the others. Still, you check the sourdough starter each dawn. Your bakery is no longer your own. Brother Gerard, young and keen, has taken your place at the trough. He measures flour by weight now, using a set of bronze scales gifted by the bishop. He tracks temperature with a small parchment chart nailed to the oven wall. His bread is good, light, uniform, precise. But it is not yours. You say nothing. You merely sit on the bench beside the fire and watch the rhythm of a new generation. The Abbey as a manor. The Abbey of St. Leontius has grown more than you ever imagined. The herb garden is now a structured apothecary. The old cowshed is now a tiled refectory with painted walls. There are more brothers, more guests, more rules, and paradoxically more exceptions to the rules. Once your bread fed 50 monks. Now it feeds over 100, plus pilgrims, servants, scribes, and the bishop's steward when he visits, which is often. Each receives a different type of loaf. The abbot eats soft white bread. The guests receive long loaves dusted with herbs. The novices eat coarse rounds. The lay workers eat broken ends or stale crusts boiled into porridge. It is all recorded, counted, catalogued. There is bread for everyone, but no bread for all. A visit from the outside. One day, a monk from a distant abbey arrives, Brother Adalric, from a monastery in the Rhineland. He tours the cloister, praises the gardens, notes the library's size. But when he visits the bakery, he pauses for a long time before speaking. In our abbey, he says, we eat only barley bread during Lent, nothing sifted, no additions. Brother Gerard replies with pride, our abbot allows us to use rye and wheat throughout the year. The Lord deserves our best. Adalric nods, but his tone sharpens. Yes, but the Lord also warned us about pride in provision. There is an awkward silence. Then he smiles kindly and changes the subject. You say nothing. But that evening, you sit quietly by the ovens and think about barley bread. I return to the rule. As Lent approaches, you propose a small idea to Brother Gerard. Let us make a single batch of bread from nothing but barley, water, and salt, as the rule once encouraged, just for the brothers, just for Friday. Gerard hesitates. It won't rise well. I know. It won't taste good. I know. Then why? You smile, because it's not for the mouth. He agrees. That Friday the bread is rough, flat, with a cracked crust and dense crumb. Some younger brothers chew slowly, uncertain. One novice dips his into broth and grimaces. But after the meal the refectory is quieter. No one reaches for more. No one asks about second portions. There is no waste. You say nothing. But that night, you sleep better than you have in years. Lessons in ash and crust. One morning the oven fails. A storm rolls through the valley. Rain seeps into the firebox overnight. You arrive before dawn, open the hatch, and find cold ash where there should be embers. You try to relight it, but the wood is damp, the flue is clogged, the fire refuses to live. You tell Brother Gerard. He frowns, frustrated. We can't feed them in time. You suggest the old way. Build a temporary fire pit, bake on flat stones, shape smaller loaves. He hesitates, then nods. The monks eat late that day. The bread is undercooked in parts, crisp in others, but it is bread, it is shared, and it is remembered. In chapter meeting the next day, the abbot praises the kitchen and, unusually, the bakery. He says nothing about the fire, or the flaws, or the delay. He says we were fed, we were humbled, and we were reminded. No one needs to ask of what. The final loaf. The time comes, as it always does, when you can no longer climb the steps to the bakery. You remain in the infirmary beside the herb garden, where the air smells of mint and wormwood. A novice brings your bread each day softened with broth, cut into small pieces. It is good, but you no longer eat much. Hunger has left you. One day, Brother Gerard visits. He places a small round loaf on your blanket. I made it by hand, he says. No scales, no chart, no special flour. You smile. He adds, it's coarse, might be too much crust. You take a bite. It tastes like the bakery when it still echoed, when flour stuck under your fingernails, when monks waited for your nod before opening the oven. It tastes like simplicity. You close your eyes. You say nothing, but he knows what it means. The loaf that endures. After your death, the brothers bury you near the cloister wall, close to the kitchen garden. On your grave, they plant ryegrass and later place a small wooden carving, a round loaf, cracked slightly at the crown. They do not build a statue. They do not sing a hymn. But each year, on Saint Benedict's feast, the bakery prepares a single loaf made from stone-ground barley, well water, salt from the coast, nothing else. It is broken by hand and passed around the table. No one eats more than another. Some complain, some smile, but no one forgets. And so ends the story of a life lived in flour and fire. A life that taught not only how to bake, but how to balance need with humility, and how to resist the temptation of plenty when sufficiency was enough. And in that, we are left with a simple reflection. When bread becomes more than sustenance, does it still nourish the soul, or does it only fill the stomach? Story 6. Mud, Mortar, and Memory, Building with Wattle and Daub. A house meant to be forgotten. In the spring of 1179, in a clearing near the River Wensum in East Anglia, a man named Ralph finishes building a house. It is small, just one room, with a low thatched roof and a single wooden door that creaks even when new. It has no foundation in stone, no carvings, no records of blueprints or sketches. There is no plaque to commemorate its completion. And that is the point. It was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to shelter a family, survive a winter, and slowly disappear. You are not Ralph, but you live as he did, a peasant carpenter, trained not in guild halls but in fields, hedgerows, and woodlots. You know how to make a wall from sticks, a roof from reeds, a floor from earth. This is not castle history. This is common history. The story of the everyday home built from mud, muscle, and memory. Materials from the margins. The house begins with wattle and daub, the most humble, resilient, and misunderstood building method of the Middle Ages. It is made from wattle, a lattice of woven sticks, hazel, willow, ash tied together and nailed between upright timber posts. Daub, a sticky mix of mud, straw, animal dung, and clay, smeared over the wattle to make it weatherproof. You gather hazel rods in the late winter when they are bendable and strong. You soak them in cold water, then weave them like baskets through the frame. It takes skill, not brute strength. One cracked rod ruins the pattern. The daub comes later, mixed in a trough with your feet like grapes for wine. Children help, chickens stay away. The smell, warm and barn-like, clings to your hands for days. This is not beautiful work, but it is effective. No nails required. Wattle and daub is not held together by iron. You use wooden pegs, natural tension, and sheer stubbornness. The entire frame of the house rests on trenches, not foundations. The vertical posts, often called staves, are driven into the soil directly. The roof's weight holds them in place, helped by crossbeams and braces. You do not call it architecture. You call it getting on with it. Every part of the house comes from within a few miles. Thatch from reeds along the marsh. Timber from coppiced woodland. Clay from a pit behind the stream. Dung from your own livestock. Straw from the field you sleep beside. To build this house is to declare, we will live here even if the world forgets our name. Rooms without rooms. The finished house is just one space, perhaps 15 feet across, with no chimney, no glass windows, and no division except for a hanging cloth if you're lucky. The fire sits in the center, on a circle of stone. Smoke rises through the thatch or leaks from the door. Soot stains the roof, timbers black over time. You sleep near the warm side in winter. The animals, goats, pigs, chickens, sleep near the door. In truth, it is not just a house. It is a barn, kitchen, nursery, and stable in one. The floor is packed earth, often coated with rushes, bracken, or straw. You sweep it with a bundle of twigs. Sometimes you spread sand to soak up dampness. It is not clean in the modern sense, but it is livable, repairable, and cheap. And when it collapses, you will build another. The knowledge in hands. You learned this craft from your father, who learned it from his aunt, who learned it from a neighbor who once repaired a tenant hall on a noble's manor. The knowledge is not written. It is spoken, watched, mimicked. You know that daub dries best in spring, that reeds should be harvested in winter before frost turns them brittle, and that walls need constant checking for mold. You also know that a well-made wattle wall can outlast a poorly mortared stone one, especially if patched regularly and kept dry. But no one records that. The lords write about stone. The monks record timber halls. Only you remember mud. Living in the wall. In summer, the walls hum with life. Bees sometimes make hives inside the daub. Spiders weave between the sticks. Wasps gnaw small holes near the eaves. Mice nest beneath the floor. You do not fear this. The wall is alive like the forest that grew it. In winter, the wall contracts. Cracks appear. You patch them with more daub mixed thicker. The wind moans at the corners, but the house holds. When it rains, the water soaks the thatch and slides down the outer walls. If the overhang is short, the base becomes soggy. You fix this by adding plaster or sometimes nailing bits of bark. Sometimes you wonder what the nobility do when their roofs leak. Then again, their roofs don't have to last on 1 week of labor and borrowed tools. The home as center. This kind of house is not just shelter, it is a world. Children are born in the same room they sleep. Grandmothers die near the fire they once stoked. The walls are smeared with years of hands brushing past. You scratch tally marks in the beam to count seasons. The doorframe wears down where your father leaned. No one outside your village will ever see your house. But it is the center of your universe. It is enough. You return one day from mending hedges and find the east wall sagging. Too much rain, too little patching. The daub is crumbling, the wattles exposed like broken ribs. It will take 3 days to repair. You sigh, gather your tools, and begin mixing mud. Because that's what you do. You patch and patch again. You do not rebuild to last forever. You build to continue. And so we pause here, in the moment where mud meets wood, and the concept of permanence is replaced by something humbler. Maintenance. A house like this cannot be passed down like land or gold. But it can be taught, rebuilt, and remembered in hands. And so the question remains. If a home disappears but its knowledge endures, is it truly lost? The quiet rebellion of roof and wall. It is now 1207. Nearly 3 decades have passed since Ralph's house and others like it began dotting the woods, stream banks, and unused common spaces of Norfolk. Your home still stands, though it leans slightly westward now. You've patched the daub so many times the walls are 3 shades of brown and gray. The wattle peeks through in places, but it holds. And yet, something new has arrived in the village, not a storm, not a pestilence, but a clerk. He carries a ledger, he speaks Latin, and he is here to count dwellings. Hearth taxes and hidden homes. This year the sheriff's agent is tallying households for hearth tax, a levy charged for the fire that burns in your home. 1 fire, 1 tax. More fires, more tax. Your house has 1 hearth, small and smoky. But for the first time in your life, the number of hearths and not just the food on them matters. Some neighbors begin to extinguish their fires during collection. Others build false chimneys or smear soot on the walls to make it look as though fire once burned, but no longer does. One man, Jory, who lives near the marsh, goes so far as to build a removable hearth, a clay ring he can bury in the night. It's clever, but also dangerous. 1 spark on rush mats and the whole house could vanish. This is the new reality. Your house, once invisible to everyone but those who lived in it, is now a line item in a ledger. Land is not just dirt. The woods where you once gathered hazel rods and willow saplings are now posted with marks, wooden boards carved with the seal of the local priory. The forest, long shared and unguarded, is now enclosed. Trespassing carries fines. Fines turn to punishment. A man caught felling a tree for a wall beam is whipped in the public square, not for theft, but for acting without permission. You begin to gather material at night. Your children help. They carry bundles of thatch under their cloaks. One slips and scratches her arm on a blackthorn. She does not cry. Even in mud and daub, you must now live in shadow. Building by right. The village reeve, the local overseer, announces a new requirement. No one may build a dwelling without the Lord's consent. There are reasons, of course. Disputes over land boundaries, questions of tithes, ensuring that all buildings are recorded for Levites. But beneath it all is something simpler: control. A home used to be something you built because you had a need. Now it is something you petition to create. A young couple down the lane waits 2 winters for approval. In the meantime, they sleep in the woman's father's house, 4 adults, 3 children, and a goat in a single room. When permission finally comes, the scribe includes a condition. The roof must be timbered, not thatched, more expensive, more permanent, less humble. And yet less yours. Of repairs and restrictions. Even repair work now draws scrutiny. A friar from the nearby abbey tells you that patching your roof without tithe payment could be considered use of the church's resources, since the reeds grow on their land. You offer a barter, dried herbs from your garden and 2 eggs. The friar accepts but reminds you gently, next time it must be coin. Coin is scarce. You begin to reuse old reeds, turning them over, trimming rot. The roof leaks more. Rain pools on the floor. The chickens roost in higher places. You fix what you can. You accept what you cannot. Stories in the structure. Your house has begun to tell its own history. The original wattle wall, once smooth, now bulges where it's been patched too many times. A wooden post in the corner bears notches, first from measuring your son's height each spring, then from his children. It is grooved with growth. The hearthstones are worn, discolored. One is cracked. You covered it once with a flat bit of slate from the river, which somehow made the smoke worse but kept the fire going. You've added shelves, one for drying herbs, one for tools, one for books no one reads. None of it was planned. All of it is essential. Your home is not tidy, but it is true. A visit from the outside. One day, a minor nobleman passes through the village on his way to inspect a nearby mill. He is followed by scribes, pages, and 2 guards. He stops at your house, curious. "This is a dwelling?" he asks. You nod. He ducks his head through the doorway, stands in the center, looks around. No fireplace. You gesture to the hearth in the floor. No chimney. You shake your head. No glass. You say, "We use oiled cloth, sometimes horn." He frowns. "Why not build in stone?" You smile, "Because stone doesn't grow back." He does not laugh. But when he leaves, one of his pages lingers and whispers, "It's warm in here." You say nothing, but it means something. The knowledge at risk. There are fewer young people who know how to mix daub correctly. They speak of apprenticeships in towns, of brick and plaster, of houses with tiles and chimneys. They want more. You do not begrudge them, but you worry. You teach your granddaughter how to find the best clay near the riverbank, how to tell if a rod is too dry, how to patch without making the wall too thick. She listens, she practices, she forgets, then she remembers. It is enough. Now, in this century where law touches walls and lords reach into hearths, you begin to wonder. Is a house still your own when you must ask permission to build it, repair it, or light its fire? Or does it simply become borrowed space, briefly inhabited? When earth gives way to stone, it is now 1324, and your home stands still, but it is an oddity. Around you, the village changes. Several cottages nearby now have plaster over their walls, hiding the rough daub beneath. One family adds a brick chimney, and another raises the roof with oak rafters from a traveling carpenter's guild. A new manor grange is being built entirely of stone. The Lord calls it permanent. And in contrast, your home is called temporary. Peasant-built. Unremarkable. But you know better. Your walls may be unwritten, but they hold the weight of memory. Every crack patched, every timber reused, every corner bears a story. Still, you feel the tide turning. Not because it must, but because the world is beginning to value appearances over function, material over skill, and imported permanence over local knowledge. Weathered by time, the daub walls now crack faster than you can fix them. The willow rods inside begin to splinter. Mice chew into the corners. The roof leaks more often. There is talk in the village that the house should come down. But you resist. Each year you patch, repair, stitch the walls together with mud and memory. Until one stormy spring night you wake to a sound like a sigh. The north wall slumps inward. The wattle frame gives way. One side of the house collapses into the garden. You sit in the doorway and stare at the wreckage. Not because it was unexpected, but because it feels like losing part of yourself. You can rebuild. Of course you can, but should you? Your grandchildren talk of timber frame cottages, of proper homes, of tiled floors and glass windows. You do not stop them, but you do not join them either. Salvage and silence. In the weeks that follow, you take what you can. The doorframe, still strong, becomes a workbench. The timber posts are used to repair the neighbor's barn. The hearthstones are lifted and stacked near the path, soon buried in weeds. The remaining wattle panels are burned ironically, the same fire they once held out. You live now in your daughter's house, a newer build, 2 rooms, a chimney, a glazed window. It is warmer, drier, and somehow emptier. There is no mud on the floor, no reeds in the roof, no scratch marks on the doorpost to show where a child once measured their height by the seasons. It is a house, but not a home, a house in the mind. One evening, your youngest grandson asks you how to build a wall like the old house. You smile. You gather a willow rod, bend it into a curve. You show him how to weave another through it. You scoop a handful of damp earth, mix it with straw. Your fingers know the steps, your voice explains the why. For a moment, the craft returns not as a structure, but as a story. The fire crackles, the room falls quiet. And in that silence you realize, this is what endures. Not the walls, not the roof, but the memory of how to build. A craft without a chronicle. Centuries from now, historians will walk the land where your village stood. They will find no stone foundations, no carved names, no painted ceilings. They will say, we do not know how these people lived. Because your kind of life leaves no monuments, only patches of discolored soil, charcoal traces, and post holes in the earth. But in your time, you built more than shelter. You built continuity. And even if no one remembers your name, they live in homes inspired by yours. Every plaster wall hides a woven memory. Every clay tile roof once rested on a reed thatch. Every hearthstone sits atop a ring, once shaped by calloused hands. And so you wonder, if the last wattle wall falls, but the knowledge lingers in story and soil, has it truly collapsed? Or is it simply waiting to be rebuilt? And so we close the story of the house in the hedge of the quiet craft that built the backbone of a continent, one wall at a time, and asked for no credit, no records, no title. Just warmth, shelter, and the patience to patch when needed.